Nobody disappears faster than people who used to say they would always be there. Daniel Brooks learned that lesson the hard way on a freezing Tuesday morning when the last thing he owned was packed into the back of a 20-year-old pickup truck that barely started anymore. The engine coughed twice before finally turning over, sounding tired in a way Daniel strangely understood. Beside him sat Shadow, a black and tan German shepherd who had spent nearly 9 years at his side through things neither of them could explain to strangers anyway. Shadow stayed quiet. He always knew when silence mattered more than comfort. Daniel looked once in the rearview mirror at the duplex he had rented for less than 8 months. One small porch, one broken gutter, one landlord who stopped pretending to care 3 weeks ago. The eviction notice still sat folded in the passenger side door pocket, like some final insult life forgot to clean up. Funny thing about losing everything. It rarely happened all at once. It happened slowly, quietly. One missed payment, one medical bill, one job rejection after another. Then suddenly people stopped calling. Family got busy. Friends disappeared. Employers looked at a 54-year-old veteran with bad knees and old injuries like experience had somehow turned into inconvenience. Daniel had worked construction after the army, then warehouse jobs, security work, anything honest. But surgeries added up. Bills got louder. Work got smaller. Somewhere between surviving and pretending things were fine, life slipped out from underneath him. The only thing that stayed was Shadow. The dog shifted slightly in his seat and rested his head against Daniel's arm for half a second. No dramatic moment. No magic. Just loyalty. The kind people talked about but rarely practiced. Daniel scratched behind the dog's ear once. "Guess it is just us again," he said quietly. Shadow looked out the window like he already knew. Colorado stretched long and cold ahead of them. Daniel drove west for hours without much of a plan except one uncomfortable truth. He could not afford another apartment. Could not afford motel rooms either. Shelters never worked well for men like him. Too crowded. Too loud. Too many ghosts packed into small spaces. He wanted quiet. Somewhere the world could stop asking questions he no longer had answers for. Snow started showing up in patches once the highway climbed higher. Mountains rose slowly in the distance, covered in old pine and silence. By late afternoon, Daniel pulled off onto an abandoned county road he barely remembered from years earlier when he worked utility jobs near the area. Nothing much out there except trees, old trails, and forgotten places people stopped looking at. Shadow suddenly lifted his head higher. Alert now. Interested. Daniel slowed the truck beside a narrow stream winding through frozen rock and half-covered snowbanks. Water still moved despite the cold. Clear. Steady. Alive somehow. Daniel stepped outside, boots crunching against thin ice while cold air cut hard into his lungs. No houses. No traffic. No people. Just mountain wind moving softly through pine trees. Shadow jumped out beside him immediately, tail low but focused, nose already scanning the area. Daniel walked slowly toward the stream. Small thing really. Maybe 6 feet across in most places. But water mattered. Water meant options. He followed the edge until something farther ahead caught his eye. A rocky slope, half hidden beneath old pine shadows. Natural stone rising against the mountain like it had been forgotten on purpose. Then he saw it. A shallow opening in the rock. Not much. Barely big enough to notice from far away. But enough to block wind. Enough to matter. Shadow moved toward it first. Ears up right now. Focused. He stopped near the entrance and stared inside longer than usual. Strange. The dog usually moved fast. Curious. But this time he just stood there. Watching. Listening maybe. Daniel stepped closer. Cold air changed near the stone. Calmer somehow. Protected from wind. He crouched slightly and looked around. Dry ground near the wall. Natural overhang. Solid rock above. Better than sleeping in the truck once temperatures dropped lower. Daniel let out one slow breath and leaned back against the stone. Tired hit harder when there was finally somewhere to stop. He looked at the stream below, then toward the old pickup parked near the trees. One sleeping bag. Some canned food. Basic tools. About $300 left to his name. That was the inventory now. 54 years old and starting over beside a mountain nobody cared about. He laughed quietly to himself once. Not because anything felt funny. Sometimes tired people just ran out of reactions. "Guess this is home now," he muttered softly. Shadow turned immediately toward him. But instead of walking back, the German shepherd stepped deeper near the edge of the rocky opening and let out one low sound in his throat. Not fear. Not warning exactly. Something else. Focus. Daniel frowned slightly. What is it? Shadow stayed staring into the darkness beneath the overhang. Completely still. Like he had found something Daniel had not noticed yet. Shadow did not move for nearly 30 seconds. That alone told Daniel Brooks something mattered. The German Shepherd had spent almost 9 years learning the difference between curiosity and caution. Dogs notice things people missed. Changes in smell. Sounds too quiet for tired ears. The difference between empty space and something waiting inside it. Daniel stepped closer to the rocky opening and crouched slightly, cold air settling harder against his knees. What did you find? He asked quietly. Shadow finally moved, stepping farther beneath the stone overhang before stopping again. The cave was not deep. Not exactly, but it stretched farther back than Daniel first thought. Maybe 12 feet in before curving slightly to the left. Dry ground. No obvious signs of animals. More important than anything else, no wind. Daniel stood still for a moment, listening. Just silence. Mountain silence. Heavy. Honest. Better than city noise ever felt. Shadow circled once before finally lying near the entrance like he had already decided this place belonged to them now. Daniel almost laughed at that. You picked quicker than I did, he muttered softly. He walked back toward the truck while the last bit of daylight faded through the trees. Cold arrived fast in the mountains. Faster than mistakes could be fixed. He grabbed what little remained of his life from the truck bed. One sleeping bag, a small tarp, basic hand tools, a camp stove barely working anymore, for cans of soup, cheap flashlight, old military backpack worn soft around the edges. Everything he owned now fit into fewer trips than groceries once did. Funny how life simplified itself after enough loss. Daniel spread the tarp near the driest part of the cave and stacked a few supplies against the rock wall. Not much, but enough to survive one night. Maybe two. Shadow stayed near the entrance watching the trees with quiet focus. No barking. No nerves. Just working. Even retired, some habits stayed. Darkness settled fully before Daniel finally sat down against the cave wall. Cold crept in slowly, but the rock blocked most of the wind. Better than the truck already. Better than sleeping exposed beneath mountain weather. He opened a can of soup and heated it carefully over the camp stove, while Shadow finally settled beside him. The dog rested his head lightly across Daniel's boot. Simple thing, but somehow it made empty places feel smaller. Daniel handed over part of an old sandwich from earlier. Shadow accepted it carefully, always polite, always patient. Better manners than most people Daniel used to know. He stared quietly toward the cave entrance while night wrapped itself around the mountain. Funny thing about hitting bottom. Nobody announced it happened. There was no music. No dramatic moment. Just one night you found yourself eating canned soup beside a dog in a cave, wondering how everything got so far away from where you thought life would end up. Daniel used to imagine retirement differently. Maybe fishing somewhere quiet. Maybe a workshop fixing things. Maybe family visits during holidays. Instead, holidays stopped coming. Calls stopped too. Even his younger brother had not checked in for over a year. Life moved on. People adjusted. Somehow Daniel had become one of those uncomfortable stories nobody wanted to sit too close to. Shadow suddenly lifted his head. Alert again. Daniel looked up immediately. Headlights. Faint through the trees. Somebody driving farther down the old county road. Strange for this area. Daniel stood carefully near the entrance and watched as an old pickup rolled slowly to a stop near the stream. Two younger men stepped out wearing heavy jackets and baseball caps. Hunters maybe. Or locals. One noticed Daniel standing near the cave almost immediately. Well, look at that. The taller one called out with a laugh. Got ourselves a mountain man. The other guy grinned. Or homeless guy. They laughed quietly to themselves. Daniel stayed calm. No reaction. Some people only felt strong when someone else looked weaker. He learned that years ago. Shadow stood beside him now. Silent. Watching. The taller man looked toward the dog. Nice dog though, he said casually. Probably smarter than the owner. More laughter. Daniel simply nodded once. Drive safe, he said quietly. No anger. No argument. That usually disappointed people looking for entertainment. The men eventually climbed back into the truck and drove off, taillights disappearing into darkness. Silence returned. Better silence this time. Daniel sat back down near the cave wall and exhaled slowly. Shadow returned beside him, resting against his side like nothing unusual had happened. "Guess we are already famous," Daniel muttered softly. Somewhere farther up the mountain, wind shifted through pine trees differently now. Colder somehow. Shadow lifted his head again toward the darkness outside and stayed focused longer than before. Daniel noticed something then. Water from the stream flowed downhill at a stronger angle than he first realized. Steady movement. Reliable. Even in freezing temperatures. He looked between the cave entrance and the running stream below. Dry shelter. Fresh water. Natural cover. Maybe not hopeless after all. Before sleep finally came, Daniel reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ear once. If you are enjoying this story so far, do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss more incredible stories ahead, he said quietly with a tired smile before looking back toward the moving water. Then something strange happened. Shadow stood again and stared directly toward the stream, completely still, like he had suddenly realized something important before Daniel did. Morning arrived cold enough to hurt. Not dramatic mountain cold from movies. Real cold. The kind that crawled through sleeping bags, settled into old injuries, and made getting up feel like losing an argument with gravity. Daniel Brooks opened his eyes slowly beneath the rocky overhang, while pale morning light pushed softly through pine trees outside. His back hurt. Knees worse. 54 years old felt different on stone. Shadow was already awake. Of course he was. The German shepherd stood near the cave entrance, ears upright, body still, watching the stream below like he had spent half the night thinking about something Daniel still had not noticed. "You ever sleep?" Daniel muttered quietly. Shadow flicked one ear but stayed focused. Daniel slowly climbed from the sleeping bag and stepped outside, boots crunching against frozen dirt. The stream looked different in daylight. Wider than he remembered. Cleaner too. Water moved steady downhill despite the freezing temperatures, slipping around rocks in ways that felt strangely dependable. Daniel crouched near the edge and studied the slope for several minutes. Combat engineer habits never fully disappeared. Grade of terrain, water flow, stability, drainage, protection. Things his brain measured automatically after years building temporary structures in places far worse than Colorado mountains. Then something clicked. The stream dropped naturally around 30 feet lower through a narrow bend before opening wider downstream. Enough slope, enough pressure, maybe enough possibility. Daniel stood slowly, eyes moving between the water and cave. Fresh water, reliable flow, natural shelter, wind protection. Not perfect, but survival rarely started perfect. He looked toward Shadow. "Think we found something?" The dog tilted his head once like he already decided hours ago. Daniel laughed quietly. First real laugh in weeks. By mid-morning, Daniel drove into the nearest small town for supplies. 25 miles down old mountain roads sat a place called Cedar Ridge. Small grocery store, gas station, hardware shop pretending not to go out of business. The kind of town where everybody noticed strangers immediately. Daniel kept his hood up while walking into the hardware store. Cheap gloves, basic shovel, rope, small handsaw. Not much money left, so every choice mattered. The younger guy behind the register looked him over quickly, then at the dusty truck outside, then toward Shadow waiting near the door. "Camping?" he asked casually. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Something like that." A taller man near the coffee machine laughed quietly. "Looks more like homeless mountain life to me." Another chuckle followed. Daniel stayed calm. Not because words never bothered him, just because pride cost energy survival could not spare. "Mountain bum starter pack," the taller man joked while eyeing the shovel and rope. Daniel paid quietly. No argument. No speech. Shadow stood beside him the whole time, silent but watching. Funny thing about people. They usually mistook quiet for weakness. Daniel learned long ago that calm people rarely needed to prove anything. Outside the store, he loaded supplies slowly into the truck bed. The taller man walked past again, shaking his head. "Winter is coming early this year," he said casually. "You should probably head somewhere warmer." Daniel leaned against the truck for half a second before answering. "Appreciate the advice." The man shrugged. "Suit yourself," then walked off. Shadow jumped into the truck and settled immediately. Daniel climbed inside, glanced once toward town, and drove away without another word. Back near the cave, work started before daylight faded. Daniel cleared loose stone first, built up dry ground deeper inside the overhang. used old military instincts to make the cave feel less temporary, more defensible, more practical. Shadow stayed near the entrance like silent security. Every so often, the dog suddenly shifted position or gave one short alert stare toward unstable rocks higher on the slope. Twice Daniel noticed loose stone he might have missed. Smart dog. Always had been. By late afternoon, Daniel stood beside the stream again, holding the cheap shovel. Water still moved steadily downhill. He crouched near one narrow section where natural rock already guided flow toward a smaller channel. Then slowly, almost absent-mindedly, he started digging. Just a test. Nothing dramatic. Small trench. See where the water moved. Military engineering was mostly problem-solving anyway. Small systems adding up over time. Shadow sat nearby watching carefully. 20 minutes later, cold stream water slowly shifted direction through the shallow path Daniel made. Not much. Barely enough to notice. But enough to prove something. Daniel leaned back slightly and stared at it longer than expected. Because for the first time in months, something actually worked. No rejection letter. No landlord warning. No apology from life. Just progress. Tiny progress. But real. He looked toward the cave above and imagined possibilities he had not allowed himself to think about in a long time. Water collection. Storage. Maybe filtration if materials came together. Small garden eventually. Fish trap maybe. Survival. Real survival. Not temporary. Permanent enough to matter. Then suddenly Shadow stood fast. Completely still again. Ears forward. Eyes locked higher up the mountain road. Daniel followed the dog's gaze. Far above the tree line, 2 trucks had stopped near the ridge overlooking the stream. Tiny figures stood watching from the distance. And even from that far away, Daniel somehow knew exactly what they were doing. Laughing. People laugh louder when they thought somebody could not hear them. Daniel Brooks learned that years ago. But mountain air carried sound farther than pride ever expected. Standing beside the stream with a cheap shovel in hand, he looked once toward the ridge where 2 pickup trucks sat parked against the fading afternoon sky. Small figures moved beside them, watching, pointing, probably talking, maybe laughing. Daniel did not need perfect hearing to understand human behavior. Some people saw struggle and called it failure because it made them feel safer about their own lives. Shadow stayed perfectly still beside him, eyes fixed uphill. Calm, alert, never nervous. Daniel crouched again, near the shallow trench he had started beside the stream. Better to work than think. Work always made sense. People rarely did. He adjusted the trench slightly, guiding water through a narrow rock bend where gravity naturally helped the flow. Small changes. Small improvements. The stream shifted again, clearer this time. Water trickled through the path he dug and settled into a shallow basin forming near flat stone. Daniel watched quietly for nearly a minute. Reliable movement. Predictable. It was not much yet. But survival started small. One system at a time. One solution before the next problem arrived. By sunset, cold rolled down through the mountain pass harder than before. Daniel gathered loose branches near the cave while Shadow moved between the trees like silent security patrol. No wasted movement. No distraction. Just instinct sharpened by years beside someone who survived through attention. Inside the cave, Daniel rearranged supplies again. Sleeping area deeper toward the back. Tools along the wall. Food higher and dry. Nothing fancy, but organized. Military habits stayed long after uniforms disappeared. He heated canned chili over the camp stove and shared part of it with Shadow. Outside, wind moved louder through pine trees now. Winter felt closer than the calendar claimed. Daniel stared at the cave ceiling for a moment while eating quietly. "We need something better," he muttered. Shadow looked up immediately. "Not forever," Daniel added. "Just enough. Enough to make winter survivable. Enough to stop feeling one storm away from losing the little they still had." Later that evening, headlights appeared again near the road. Different truck this time. Slower. Daniel stepped near the cave entrance while Shadow quietly moved beside him. An older man climbed out wearing a heavy flannel jacket and work boots. Late 60s maybe. Weathered face. Local. He held a flashlight but kept respectful distance. "Evening," the man called out calmly. Daniel nodded once. "Evening." The man glanced toward the cave, then the stream, then back at Daniel. "Folks in Cedar Ridge talking about the veteran living up here," he said carefully. Daniel almost smiled at how fast small towns worked. "Guess word travels." The older man shrugged slightly. Name is Frank Miller. He looked toward Shadow. Beautiful dog. Shadow stayed calm, but observant. Frank hesitated a second before continuing. Just wanted to tell you winter comes rough out here. Worse than folks expect. Daniel nodded once. I figured. Frank looked around the cave entrance again, noticing the shovel marks near the stream. You trying to stay? Daniel paused. Honest question deserved honest answer. Trying to survive. Frank gave one slow nod like he respected the difference. Used to know another veteran who lived up these mountains years ago, he said quietly. People laughed at him too, until a storm hit, and everybody ended up needing his help. Daniel stayed silent. Frank reached into the truck and pulled out something wrapped in old cloth. Firewood starter bricks. Simple thing. Useful thing. Figured this might help, he said. Daniel looked at the bundle for half a second before taking it carefully. Thank you. Frank nodded once. Not everybody in town is cruel. Then after a pause, he added quietly. But some folks up there near the ridge, they like making trouble. Daniel glanced briefly toward where the trucks had parked earlier. Frank noticed immediately. The Carter boys, he said, own too much land and too little patience. Shadow suddenly stood taller, staring toward the ridge again. Wind shifted. Something changed in the air. Frank noticed too. Storm smell, he muttered. You know weather? Daniel asked. Frank gave a small laugh. Lived here 40 years. Mountains tell you before the news does. He looked toward dark clouds slowly gathering over distant peaks. You should prepare. Daniel watched the sky carefully now. Clouds moved wrong. Faster than normal. Pressure in the air felt heavier. Even Shadow stayed more focused than usual. Frank climbed back into his truck before stopping one last time. By the way, he said through the window, you might want to keep an eye on that stream. Sometimes what saves you can turn dangerous real fast. Then he drove away into darkness. Daniel stood beside the cave entrance long after the taillights disappeared. Wind moved colder now. Faster too. He looked toward the stream below. Still steady. Still calm. But something about it felt different tonight. Shadow suddenly walked downhill without warning and stopped near the water's edge. Completely still. Watching something upstream Daniel could not yet see. The mountains changed moods overnight. Daniel Brooks knew enough about weather to trust instincts before forecasts, and by sunrise, instinct said trouble was coming. Wind moved differently now. Sharper. Faster. The steady quiet of the valley had disappeared, replaced by restless air slipping hard between pine trees like the mountain itself had grown uneasy. Shadow stayed near the stream before daylight, completely still again. Watching upstream. Waiting. Daniel stepped beside him and narrowed his eyes toward the bend farther uphill. Water looked higher. Not dangerous yet, but faster. Snowmelt maybe. Incoming weather. Or something else. Frank might have been right, Daniel muttered quietly. Shadow finally turned toward him before walking back uphill toward the cave like the inspection had already finished. Daniel followed slowly. Work came first. Worry later. He spent the morning reinforcing the cave entrance with loose timber branches collected from nearby fallen trees. Nothing fancy, just structure. Windbreak. Extra insulation. He stacked stones lower near the entrance to redirect runoff if weather turned ugly. Small military habits. Problem solving before problems arrived. The little trench near the stream needed adjusting too. Daniel widened one section and used flat rock to stabilize water flow toward the shallow basin he had made yesterday. It still amazed him how quickly purpose returned once survival became practical. Pain mattered less when hands stayed busy. Hunger quieter too. Around noon, the sound of engines rolled down from the ridge. Daniel barely looked up at first, but Shadow noticed immediately. Alert posture. Focused ears. Same truck from before. Then another behind it. The Carter boys. Daniel recognized the taller one climbing out near the edge of the road above. Loud voice. Easy confidence. The kind people borrowed from money and land ownership. Hey mountain man, the taller one shouted downhill with a grin. Looks like you really moved in. His younger brother laughed. You charging rent for cave tours yet? Daniel kept working near the trench without reacting. Not ignoring them exactly. Just choosing peace over pointless noise. Shadow stayed nearby, calm but observant. Dog still looks smarter than you, the younger brother called. More laughter followed. Then the taller one pointed toward the stream. You know that thing floods sometimes, right? Daniel looked up finally. Appreciate the concern. The taller man shrugged. Not concern. Entertainment. Another laugh. Then both trucks rolled away again, leaving silence behind. Daniel watched the dust settle before returning to work. Funny thing about humiliation. Some people thought it weakened you. But after enough years, it mostly became weather. Temporary. Forgettable. Shadow nudged Daniel's arm once before settling near the cave entrance again. Loyal. Constant. Better company than bitterness ever offered. By late afternoon, clouds rolled lower across the mountains. Heavy now. Darker than yesterday. Wind picked up fast enough to make tree branches sway harder than normal. Daniel stood outside the cave and looked toward the horizon. Storm coming. Bigger than expected. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. Hard to tell. He checked supplies carefully. For cans left. Some dried food. Water access secure for now. Sleeping gear decent enough. But one real storm could change everything. Cold mountains did not care how prepared somebody felt. Daniel gathered extra firewood until sunset, while Shadow moved constantly between tree lines like silent patrol. Once, the dog stopped near the stream again and barked sharply toward the water for the first time since arriving. One bark. Short. Serious. Daniel walked over immediately. Water level definitely higher now. Maybe 3 inches. Current faster too. He crouched near the edge and frowned. The trench still held. But Frank's warning came back fast. Sometimes what saves you can turn dangerous real fast. Daniel stood slowly and scanned uphill. Snow clouds pressed lower over the mountains now. Too low. Too fast. He remembered enough survival training to know when weather stopped being inconvenience and started becoming threat. Back inside the cave, he reorganized everything before dark. Dry food higher up. Blankets farther from the entrance. Fire starter bricks Frank gave him stacked near reach. Shadow stayed unusually restless, pacing near the entrance before stopping every few minutes to listen. You feel it too? Daniel asked quietly. The dog glanced back once. Outside, wind suddenly slammed harder against the rock face. Then snow started. Early. Fast. Bigger flakes than expected. Daniel moved to the entrance and stared out into growing white darkness. Somewhere lower down the valley, headlights moved unexpectedly near the old county road. Strange time to be driving into weather like this. One truck. Then suddenly another vehicle farther behind, moving slower. Stuck maybe. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Shadow stood beside him now, body tense. Because even from this distance, something felt wrong. The second vehicle stopped near the stream crossing below. And it did not move again. Snow erased confidence faster than almost anything else in the mountains. 1 hour earlier, the valley still looked manageable. Cold, yes. Difficult, maybe. But survivable. Now visibility dropped so fast it felt like the world itself had shrunk. Daniel Brooks stood at the cave entrance staring downhill where the second vehicle sat half sideways near the stream crossing. Headlights still on. Snow piling quickly against the tires. No movement. Wind carried hard enough now to make even short distance look dangerous. Shadow stood beside him, body tense, ears locked forward. The German shepherd gave one low sound in his throat. Focus. Concern. Something was wrong. Daniel looked once toward the supplies stacked deeper in the cave. Small fire burning. Dry shelter. Safe enough to wait out the storm. Smart choice said stay put. Military instinct said assess first. Human instinct said somebody down there probably needed help. He grabbed the heavier jacket hanging near the wall and clipped on the flashlight. Let us go see, he muttered quietly. Shadow moved instantly. No hesitation. Outside, cold hit harder than expected. Snow reached nearly 6 inches already and falling fast. Wind pushed sideways through pine trees, carrying that sharp mountain sound Daniel remembered from storms long ago. The kind that turned small mistakes expensive. Step by step, they moved downhill toward the crossing. Shadow stayed slightly ahead, checking ground naturally like he had done his entire working life. The vehicle looked newer up close. Midsize SUV. Tires half buried already. Engine still running weakly. Daniel knocked once against the fog driver's side window. A startled woman looked up immediately. Maybe mid-30s. 2 younger teenagers in the back seat. Panic written all over tired faces. She cracked the window only an inch. Are you local? She asked quickly. Fear and relief mixed together. Daniel nodded once. Enough to know you cannot stay here tonight. The woman looked toward the road disappearing into blowing snow. GPS said there was another route, she said softly. Daniel almost smiled. GPS did not survive mountain weather very well. Road floods near the crossing when storms hit, he said calmly. And snow is getting worse. The younger boy in back leaned forward slightly. Mom said we were fine. Nobody answered that. The woman looked embarrassed now. Cold scared people into honesty fast. We were heading to a cabin rental, she admitted quietly. Phone signal disappeared. Daniel glanced at the stream nearby. Water definitely higher now. Faster too. Frank had been right. What help could turn dangerous quickly? You cannot stay here, Daniel repeated gently. I have shelter uphill. She hesitated. Understandable. Strange man in the mountains offering help usually sounded like bad judgment in movies. But real life had weather. And weather forced hard decisions. Shadow stepped forward slightly, then sat calmly near the SUV door, perfectly still. The younger girl in back looked immediately relieved. The dog likes us, she whispered quietly. Daniel looked toward Shadow. Smart dog. Better judge of people than most humans anyway. The woman finally exhaled slowly. Okay. Getting them uphill took time. Snow deeper now. Wind stronger. Daniel carried one backpack, while the teenagers carefully followed Shadow's path through the dark. The German shepherd moved confidently, checking behind every few steps like he understood this was escort duty now. Halfway uphill, the younger boy slipped once on hidden ice. Daniel caught him before he fell hard. Slow, Daniel said calmly. Mountains punish rushing. Nobody argued after that. By the time they reached the cave, snow-covered footprints almost immediately behind them. Storm moving fast now. Dangerous fast. Inside, warmth changed everything. Not luxury, just safety. Firelight. Dry ground. Protection from wind. The teenagers looked around quietly, surprised. Probably expected something worse. Daniel handed over blankets without saying much. The woman sat near the fire, visibly exhausted now that panic started fading. I am Rachel, she said quietly after a while. These are Ethan and Lily. Daniel nodded once. Daniel, then motioned toward the German shepherd resting near the entrance. That is Shadow. Lily smiled softly. He feels safe. Daniel looked at the dog for half a second. He usually knows before I do. Wind slammed harder outside. Snow hit rock loud enough now to hear. Rachel stared toward the entrance nervously. How bad is this storm? Daniel looked outside once before answering honestly. Bad enough that you are lucky your car stopped near us. Nobody spoke after that. Silence settled differently now. Less fear. More reality. Ethan finally looked toward Daniel. Do you live here? Daniel almost laughed quietly at how strange that question sounded. Working on it. Rachel looked around the cave again. Firewood stacked. Supplies organized. Water container already filling from the trench system outside. Small details people noticed when survival became personal. Then suddenly Shadow stood fast again. Ears upright. Alert posture returning instantly. Daniel noticed it too. Something outside. Different from wind. Different from snow. Then came the sound. Faint at first. Hard to hear beneath the storm. But unmistakable once it came again. Another vehicle horn. Farther down the mountain. Repeating slowly through the blizzard. The second horn came louder this time. Long, weak. Desperate. Even through heavy snow and mountain wind, it carried something people recognized immediately when trouble became real. Fear. Daniel Brooks stood near the cave entrance for 3 full seconds without speaking. Fire behind him. Safe shelter. 3 people finally warming up after nearly freezing in a stranded vehicle. Smart decision, said stay inside. Wait until morning. Nobody would blame him for that. But military training had a way of rewriting comfort. Once you knew somebody might need help, silence stopped feeling peaceful. It started feeling heavy. Shadow stood already facing downhill, body tense, ears forward, ready before permission ever arrived. Rachel noticed Daniel looking toward the storm. You are not seriously going back out there? She asked quietly. Her voice carried concern now, not suspicion anymore. Daniel grabbed the heavier flashlight from beside the wall and checked batteries automatically. Habit. Routine. Depends how stuck they are, he answered calmly. Ethan looked nervous immediately. But what if it is dangerous? Daniel paused before answering. Honest questions deserved honest answers. Mountains are dangerous whether people are prepared or not. Shadow stepped closer to the entrance. Waiting. Daniel looked toward Rachel. Stay here. Firewood is stacked left side. Water container is full. Do not go outside unless you absolutely have to. Rachel shook her head slowly. You already helped us. You do not owe anybody else anything tonight. Daniel almost smiled at that. Funny how strangers sometimes understood something old friends forgot. Cold does not care who deserves help, he said quietly. Then he nodded once toward Shadow. Come on, partner. Outside, the storm felt worse than before. Snow pushed sideways now, visibility shrinking to maybe 20 feet at best. Wind cut hard enough to sting exposed skin immediately. Shadow moved slightly ahead, paws steady even through deepening snow. Daniel followed the sound of the horn downhill toward the crossing road. One step at a time. Slow. Careful. Mountain storms punished confidence fast. Halfway down, he noticed tire tracks almost erased already beneath fresh snow. Whoever got stuck had not been here long. Then headlights appeared through white darkness. One truck angled badly near a snowbank, engine dead. Daniel approached carefully and knocked once against the driver's side door. No response at first. Then movement. The door opened suddenly. Daniel blinked once. Of course. The taller Carter brother stared back in complete disbelief. Same man who laughed from the ridge. Same smug voice. Only tonight looked different. Pale face. Nervous eyes. Cold finally equalized things money never could. You? The man muttered quietly. Daniel glanced toward the passenger seat. Younger brother inside wrapped in a jacket, shivering hard. Truck stalled. The taller brother admitted after a second. Pride sounded smaller now. Phone dead too. Daniel nodded once. No lecture. No revenge. No dramatic moment where life punished people loudly. Reality already handled that part. Can you walk? Daniel asked. The taller brother hesitated. We are fine. Right on cue. The younger brother opened the door and nearly slipped trying to stand. Shadow stepped forward immediately, calm but focused. The younger man actually looked relieved seeing the dog. Funny how fear made people honest. Daniel looked uphill toward the cave, barely visible anymore through blowing snow. Shelter is up there, he said simply. The taller Carter brother frowned. Embarrassment settling in now. Your cave. Daniel nodded once. Silence sat awkwardly between them for half a second. Because sometimes humiliation arrived quietly. No crowd. No speech. Just consequences. Finally, the taller brother exhaled hard. Guess we do not have many options. No, Daniel answered calmly. You do not. Getting uphill proved harder this time. Snow reached nearly knee-deep in places now. Wind stronger too. Shadow naturally moved between everybody, checking behind constantly like silent security. The younger Carter brother slipped twice before Daniel steadied him both times. Nobody joked anymore. Nobody laughed. Mountains had a way of correcting people without raising their voices. Near the cave entrance, warm firelight finally cut through darkness. Rachel looked stunned when Daniel stepped inside, followed by the Carter brothers. Recognition came instantly. Awkward silence followed. Nobody needed introductions. Everybody understood exactly what happened. The taller Carter brother stood near the entrance awkwardly, snow melting off his coat. He started quietly before stopping. Pride and gratitude did not mix easily. Daniel simply handed over dry blankets. Sit down before you freeze. No speech. No punishment. Just kindness. Harder thing to forget anyway. Shadow settled near the entrance, but stayed unusually alert. Wind slammed louder outside now. Snow hitting rock hard enough to shake loose dust from the cave ceiling. Then suddenly the stream sounded different. Louder. Faster. Daniel turned immediately toward the entrance. Because underneath the storm, he heard something else now. Water rising. Water sounded different when it stopped behaving. Daniel Brooks knew that sound immediately. Fast water carried urgency. Rising water carried warning. Standing near the cave entrance, he listened for 3 seconds while wind pushed hard against the mountainside and snow hammered the rocks outside. The stream below no longer sounded steady. It sounded angry. Shadow heard it too. The German shepherd stood instantly, ears locked forward, body tense but controlled. Always alert. Always reading danger faster than people could. Rachel looked toward Daniel from near the fire. What is wrong? Daniel grabbed the flashlight without hesitation. Water is rising too fast. The taller Carter brother frowned immediately. Because of snow? Daniel shook his head slightly. Snow alone does not move this fast. Mountain runoff. Ice blockage upstream breaking loose. Hidden flooding. Too many possibilities. None good. Daniel stepped carefully outside for a better look. Cold slapped hard against his face. Snow already drifted nearly knee-deep near the cave entrance. Visibility terrible, but the sound told enough story already. The stream he had relied on only yesterday now moved faster and louder through the darkness below. Flashlight beam cut briefly across rushing water. Definitely higher. Maybe another foot already. Fast enough to matter. Then he saw it. Part of the trench system he built had already overflowed. Water spreading wider toward lower rocks near the cave entrance path. Not danger yet, but close enough to pay attention. Shadow moved beside him without command, paws steady despite deep snow. The dog stared uphill toward the bend in the stream again. Focused. Listening. Daniel trusted that look. Ranger units used to joke that military dogs often knew things before radios did. Shadow always seemed to prove them right. Back inside, tension settled quietly across the cave. Rachel held a blanket around Lily while Ethan sat closer to the fire, trying to look brave. The younger Carter brother stayed unusually quiet now, cold finally replacing arrogance. The taller brother stood awkwardly near the entrance. Still uncomfortable. Still embarrassed. Daniel checked the cave carefully. Dry supplies safe. Firewood secure. Water storage container nearly full. Cave elevated enough for now. But mountains changed plans quickly. We stay alert tonight, Daniel said calmly. Nobody leaves unless I say. The taller Carter brother nodded immediately this time. Funny how storms adjusted personalities faster than lectures. Silence settled for a while except wind and rushing water outside. Rachel eventually looked toward Daniel. Can I ask something? He glanced up. Sure. She hesitated briefly. Why are you living out here? Honest question. No judgment behind it now. Just curiosity. Daniel stared quietly toward the fire for a few seconds before answering. Because nowhere else felt like home anymore. Nobody interrupted. Even the teenagers listened carefully now. Daniel leaned back slightly against the cave wall. After the army, everybody says things get easier, he continued quietly. But sometimes quiet feels harder than danger. Shadow moved closer and rested beside him. Habit. Familiar. Jobs came and went, Daniel said. Friends got busy. Family drifted. Bills stayed. He shrugged slightly. Eventually life gets small enough you stop pretending. Rachel looked down for a second, probably thinking about her own assumptions. The taller Carter brother cleared his throat awkwardly. He stopped. Started over. We probably should not have messed with you. Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Mountains teach everybody eventually, he said quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. Because tonight the lesson felt personal. Then Ethan looked toward Shadow. Did he serve with you? Daniel nodded once. Most loyal partner I ever had. Shadow glanced up briefly at hearing his name before settling again. He saved me more than once, Daniel added quietly. Still does. Outside, wind screamed harder against the rocks. Then suddenly came a sound nobody liked. Crack. Loud. Sharp. Somewhere upstream. Shadow stood instantly. Alert posture returning. Daniel moved to the entrance fast and aimed the flashlight toward the stream. Water surged harder through the bend now. Higher than before. Faster too. Then something else appeared through the blowing snow. Large branches. Debris moving downstream. Fast. Too fast. Daniel's stomach tightened slightly. Natural dam upstream may be breaking apart. If enough water released suddenly, crossing roads would disappear completely. Maybe worse. He turned back inside immediately. Calm voice. Controlled tone. Everybody grabbed blankets and moved deeper into the cave. Rachel stood quickly. Is it flooding? Daniel shook his head once. Not yet. Not yet mattered. But not yet never lasted forever in mountain weather. The taller Carter brother helped move supplies without being asked this time. Funny how gratitude changed people. Ethan quietly helped stack firewood higher. Lily stayed close to Shadow, who refused to move far from the entrance. Watching. Waiting. Then through wind and rushing water came something unexpected. Headlights. Faint. Moving badly near the lower crossing road. Daniel narrowed his eyes into the storm. Another vehicle. Slipping sideways near the stream. And for 1 second, before snow covered the view again, he thought he recognized the truck. Daniel Brooks narrowed his eyes through blowing snow and knew exactly whose truck it was before the headlights even steadied. Frank Miller. Same old pickup. Same uneven movement on mountain roads. Only tonight something felt wrong. The truck tilted badly near the crossing, wheels slipping closer to rising water with every second. Daniel exhaled once through the cold. Of course. Storms never finished when people wanted them to. Shadow stood immediately at his side. Already waiting for the decision, Daniel had not spoken aloud yet. Rachel looked toward the entrance, fear crossing her face again. Please do not tell me you are going back out there, she said quietly. Daniel grabbed the heavier rope hanging beside the wall. Frank warned us, he said calmly. Now it is my turn. The taller Carter brother stood up immediately. Different man than yesterday. Pride stripped down by weather and kindness. I am coming, he said. Daniel looked at him for half a second, measured him, then nodded once. Stay close. Listen carefully. Outside, the storm hit like punishment. Snow nearly waist deep in places now. Wind pushed sideways hard enough to steal balance if somebody rushed. Shadow moved ahead confidently, checking safe footing like instinct never rested. The Carter brothers struggled behind them, but stayed quiet. Funny how fear replaced arrogance faster than arguments ever could. By the time they reached the crossing, water surged louder than before. Stream no longer looked familiar. It looked alive, angry, fast enough to drag branches downhill without effort. Frank's truck leaned dangerously near the edge where melting runoff had softened ground beneath fresh snow. Daniel knocked hard against the driver's side window. Frank looked up immediately, relief hitting his face so fast it almost hurt to see. The older man cracked the door carefully. Transmission died, he admitted quietly. Thought I could make it through. Daniel gave the smallest shake of his head. Mountain stopped caring about plans hours ago. Shadow circled near the truck, alert but calm. Then suddenly barked once toward the downhill edge. Daniel followed the dog's stare immediately. Ground near the passenger tire had started collapsing toward rushing water. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. Slow. Dangerous. Out now, Daniel said firmly. Frank did not argue. Neither did the Carter brother. Between rope, steady footing, and shadow naturally guiding safer paths, they slowly worked uphill through deep snow. Hard climb. Cold heavier now. But survival rarely cared about comfort. Halfway back, Frank paused once trying to catch his breath. You really built something up there? He asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the cave, barely visible through snow. Working on it. Frank gave one tired laugh. Town thought you were crazy. Daniel almost smiled. Still might be. When they finally reached shelter, warmth hit differently this time. Not luxury. Relief. Rachel immediately helped Frank near the fire while Ethan handed over dry blankets without being asked. Even Lily moved closer to Shadow, gently scratching behind the dog's ear while the German shepherd stayed alert near the entrance. The cave somehow felt smaller now, but warmer too. Stranger thing than survival happened inside those rocks that night. People changed. Quietly. Nobody laughed at Daniel anymore. Nobody looked at the cave like failure. They looked at it like safety. Like preparation. Like something built by somebody who refused to quit when quitting would have made sense. Hours passed. Storm screamed outside. Water rose, but never reached the cave. Daniel's trench redirected enough runoff to protect the entrance. Fire stayed warm. Supplies stayed dry. Small systems mattered. Little things saved people. Near sunrise, snow finally slowed. Wind softened too. Mountains looked different after surviving them. By morning, pale sunlight pushed slowly through broken clouds. Everybody stepped outside carefully. Silence again. Clean silence. Fresh snow stretching across pine trees like nothing terrible ever happened. Down below, the crossing road had disappeared beneath water and ice. Frank looked at it for a long second and shook his head slowly. If you had not come, he stopped there. Did not need finishing. The taller Carter brother stood awkwardly beside Daniel for a moment before finally speaking. I was wrong about you. Honest words sounded different in cold mountain air. We both were, his younger brother added quietly. Daniel simply nodded once. No speech. No victory. Quiet dignity mattered more than revenge ever could. A week later, Cedar Ridge started talking differently. People stopped saying homeless veteran. Started saying mountain veteran. Then survival expert. Then simply Daniel. Some even helped bring supplies. Others offered tools. Frank returned with lumber. The Carter brothers helped reinforce the cave entrance without being asked twice. Funny how respect grew once pride disappeared. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. Snow melted. The stream calmed again, steady and useful. Daniel improved the trench system properly this time. Water storage. Better drainage. Small garden plans. Real beginnings. One quiet afternoon, Daniel sat outside the cave holding warm coffee while Shadow rested beside him watching the moving water below. Same stream. Same mountain. Different life. He lost a house. Lost money. Lost people. But somehow out here, with almost nothing left, he finally stopped feeling lost himself. Shadow rested his head lightly against Daniel's boot like he always did. Loyal. Constant. Family. Daniel looked toward the water one last time and smiled quietly. Turns out losing everything only matters if you stop building.